It started with words. Not a pitch. Not a swing. Not a collision at home plate. Just words. And those words turned a regular May evening at American Family Field into something that nobody in that stadium, not the players, not the managers, not the 40,000 fans in the stands, was prepared for. By the end of the night, a Brewers player had been ejected. His jersey number had been stripped. And in the middle of it all, standing quietly in the dugout, was Shohei Ohtani. His reaction was 3 words. 3 words that silenced the opposing dugout and left manager Pat Murphy with nowhere to turn. But to understand why that moment hit so hard, you have to go back to the beginning of that night. On paper, this was not supposed to be a complicated game. The Brewers were at home. Their lineup was sharp. Their starting pitcher had been on a strong run heading into the series. The Dodgers, despite being the defending champions, were coming in off a back-to-back road stretch that had tested their rotation and their bullpen equally. It was supposed to be a competitive game. A clean, physical, professional baseball game. And for the first 2 innings, that is exactly what it was. Then Shohei Ohtani stepped into the batter's box in the 3rd inning. The stadium shifted. It always does when Ohtani appears. There is something about his presence at the plate that changes the energy of a ballpark. The crowd gets quieter and louder at the same time. Pitchers pause just a half-second longer before their windup. Fielders adjust their positioning by instinct rather than instruction. The Brewers pitcher delivered. A 152 km/h fastball, outside corner. Ohtani let it go. Ball 1. The second pitch was a slider, low and away. Ohtani fouled it off, a sharp crack that sent the ball spinning into the netting behind home plate. The third pitch was where the night changed. It was a pitch up and in. Aggressive. The kind of pitch you throw to send a message. The ball came in at 154 km/h and caught Ohtani on the upper arm. He didn't fall. He didn't react dramatically. He rolled his arm once, looked at the pitcher for a moment, and walked to first base. From the Dodgers dugout, the reaction was measured. Manager Dave Roberts stood at the railing and watched. He didn't come out immediately. He didn't argue. He simply watched Ohtani jog to first base and waited to see what came next. What came next was the part that nobody expected. From somewhere inside the Brewers dugout came a voice. Loud enough to carry across the field. Pointed enough that the home plate umpire turned his head. Sharp enough that several Dodgers players near the dugout steps stopped what they were doing and looked across the diamond. The words were directed at Ohtani. They were not words you could repeat in a post-game press conference. They were not words that belonged in a professional baseball stadium. And they were not words that the umpires could simply let pass without consequence. The home plate umpire moved quickly. He turned toward the Brewers dugout and issued a warning. The Brewers bench coach stepped forward and pointed across the field, as if to redirect the attention elsewhere. But the umpire had already identified the source. He raised his right arm. He pointed toward the tunnel. The ejection was immediate. The player, a veteran infielder who had been with the Brewers organization for 6 years, was removed from the game before he ever took the field that inning. The stadium went from confused murmuring to open noise in a matter of seconds. Brewers fans near the dugout section stood up. Some of them were angry. Some of them were confused. Most of them had not heard the words clearly enough to understand what had caused the reaction. But the umpires knew. The Dodgers players knew. And the cameras near the Brewers dugout had captured everything. Within hours, the league office would review the footage. Within 48 hours, the decision would come down. The player's jersey number, his identity in that organization, the number he had worn through 6 seasons and 3 playoff appearances, would be stripped pending disciplinary review. It was the kind of consequence that rarely happens in baseball. The kind that signals the league is treating this as something more serious than a routine ejection. Pat Murphy came out of the dugout the moment the ejection was signaled. He walked fast. Not the slow, deliberate walk of a manager who is buying time for his pitcher. This was the walk of a man who believed he had an argument and intended to make it. He got within arm's reach of the home plate umpire and started immediately. His cap was off before he finished his first sentence. His voice was loud enough to reach the lower deck seats behind home plate. From a distance, his body language told the whole story. He was not just arguing the ejection. He was trying to shift the conversation. He gestured toward the Dodgers dugout. He pointed in the direction of first base, where Otani was standing. His argument, reconstructed through multiple sources who were close enough to hear, was that the situation had been provoked. That Otani's presence at the plate and the manner in which he carried himself had created tension. That the words from the dugout were a reaction, not an instigation. The umpire did not move. Murphy continued. He kicked the dirt once. He raised his voice another level. He gestured again toward Otani, who had not moved from first base and had not said a single word since walking away from the batter's box. The umpire issued a final warning to Murphy. If he continued, he would join his player in the tunnel. Murphy stayed. But the argument was over. He walked back to the dugout slower than he had come out. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the ground. He sat down at the far end of the bench and did not speak for several minutes. While all of that was happening, Shohei Ohtani stood at first base. He did not point toward the Brewers dugout. He did not speak to the umpires. He did not look in the direction of Murphy's argument. He stood with both hands at his sides, weight balanced, eyes forward, waiting for the game to resume. One reporter who was positioned near the field-level camera area said that what struck him most was not Ohtani's stillness. It was the complete absence of performance in his stillness. He was not trying to look calm. He simply was calm. There was no tension in his jaw. No tightening of his grip on the batting glove. No sideways glance toward the commotion. He was already thinking about second base. When the game resumed and the next batter came to the plate, Otani took his lead. He studied the pitcher's motion with the same focus he would have given any other situation in any other game. When the ball was hit on the ground to the right side, he read it immediately, rounded second, and held at third on a clean single. He scored 2 pitches later on a sacrifice fly. He crossed home plate without celebration. Touched the hands of his teammates in the dugout. Sat down. Picked up his helmet. Put on his batting gloves again. Ready for the next at-bat. It was as if the chaos of the previous inning had happened to someone else entirely. It was in the dugout, during the 4th inning, that Otani said the words that would later be reported by multiple sources inside the Dodgers organization. A teammate, sitting next to him on the bench, leaned over and asked him something quietly. Whether it was about the hit by pitch, or the ejection, or Murphy's argument, the exact question was not captured clearly. Otani's answer was 3 words. That is baseball. He said it without looking up. Without raising his voice. Without any visible emotion attached to the statement. He said it the way a person says something they have believed for so long that it no longer requires emphasis. That is baseball. When those words reached the Brewers dugout, and in a stadium, words always travel, the reaction was described by one source as complete silence. Not stunned silence. Not angry silence. The silence of a dugout that had run out of responses. Murphy, who was told about the comment after the game, did not respond directly to it in his press conference. But the expression on his face when the question was asked said everything that his words did not. The Brewers lost 5-1. Pat Murphy walked into the press conference room with the look of a man who had been carrying something heavy for 3 hours and had not yet found a place to set it down. He sat at the table. He poured water into a glass and didn't drink it. He looked at the reporters in front of him and waited for the first question. It came quickly. Pat, can you walk us through what happened in the third inning? The ejection, your argument with the umpire, what was your perspective on all of it? Murphy exhaled slowly. He placed both hands flat on the table. He looked at the water glass for a moment. Then he looked up. I thought the umpire moved too fast. I thought there was context that he didn't fully consider before making that call. I went out there to explain that context. He paused. I don't think the explanation was received the way I intended it. A reporter pressed further. Were you suggesting that Ohtani had provoked the situation in some way? Murphy's jaw tightened slightly. I was suggesting that baseball games create heat. And sometimes that heat produces reactions. That's all I was suggesting. The room was quiet for a moment. Then another reporter asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Shohei Ohtani reportedly said after the incident that, and I quote, "That is baseball." What is your response to that? Murphy looked at the table again. He was quiet for several seconds. Long enough that the room became genuinely uncomfortable. Then he looked up. And for the first time that night, something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Not frustration. Something closer to the kind of acknowledgement that costs a man something to give. He's right, Murphy said quietly. That is baseball. And he handled it better than we did tonight. The room did not erupt. Nobody wrote anything down frantically. There was no dramatic reaction. There was just silence. The kind of silence that means everyone in the room understood that the most important thing that was going to be said that evening had just been said. On the other side of the stadium, Dave Roberts sat in his own press conference chair with the quieter energy of a manager who had won a game he was not entirely focused on winning cleanly. He had watched everything from the dugout. The hit by pitch. The ejection. Murphy's argument. Ohtani at first base. A reporter asked him what he had seen from Ohtani during the chaos. Roberts leaned back slightly. What I saw, he said, was a player who understood exactly how much power he had in that moment. And chose not to use any of it. He let that sit for a second before continuing. That is a level of discipline that you cannot coach. That is something a player either has or he doesn't. He was asked one final question before wrapping up. Did Ohtani say anything to him after returning to the dugout from first base? Roberts smiled. It was a small smile. The kind that carries more information than a long answer. He asked me if we had the signs right for the next batter, Roberts said. That was it. That was the whole conversation. The ballpark was in chaos that night. A player was ejected. A number was stripped. A manager argued and lost. Words were spoken that crossed a line that professional baseball rarely crosses so visibly. And in the center of all of it, Shohei Ohtani scored a run, sat down in the dugout, and said 3 words that ended the entire conversation before it ever really started. That is baseball. Some players make the game bigger when chaos surrounds them. Ohtani made the chaos smaller. And that, more than the ejection or the argument or the stripped number, is the story of that night.